Hello everybody, this is GeneralJannis, and today in Death Card Tactics I will be looking at the Plague Marines and the new weapon statistics that we have seen leaked from assembly guides. So let's take a look. So today, the 6th December, we have now seen posted the leak rules for all the Plague Marine weapon stats from assembly guides. The updated stats mainly have been affecting the melee weapons, but also we have seen some changes for the ranged weapons. So let's look at all these weapon updates, and then I have been also looking at the optimal weapon loadouts and the comparison of all these weapons from Plague Marine squads and what could be some considerations and some suggestions for arming our Plague Marines. So let's get started. So, starting with the Plague Marine's ranged weapons, here is the table for all the weapons that were on the leaked data sheet, and we have with bold we see where we have the changes. So basically, my personal, at least, favorite weapon for Plague Marines, the Blight Launcher, like we saw the heavy Blight Launcher for the 30th Blow Throne, is going from a variable damage D3 to now a straight damage 2, which I think is overall better. So it's more consistent and clearly better versus 2 wound models, for example, intercessors or other troops with 2 wounds. However, it's a bit now you don't have the chance to get a lucky, let's say, 3 damage versus a tougher opponent like an Eradicator or an Aggressor or some Terminator type that before you could get lucky and kill one off. Before, of course, you could also be unlucky and not kill an Intercessor off with a Blight Launcher, just rolling a 1 for the damage, which happened quite often, I assume. The Plague Spewer and the Plague Belcher, the flamer weapons that are part of the special weapons for the Plague Marines, get the expected increase of range to 12 inches from 9 inch previously. And I hope basically the Blightspawn weapon also will get this range increase, and it's nice to starting with 12 inches and then, for example, prolonging this with 6 inches with a Grandfather's Blessing. It could be quite interesting. So maybe the Plague Spewer and the Plague Belcher could get some increased usability and defensive capabilities for Overwatch with the auto hit abilities of these weapons. There have been no changes in the other weapons, and assuming here that all choices are the same to our previous codex, the point costs are unknown, and today the bolter, of course, is the standard, and then you have the option to select 2 of these weapons here, the Blight Launcher, the Plasma Gun, the Melta Gun, the Plague Spewer, and the Plague Belcher, and 2 for the entire squad. And all those today are 10 points, and the Plague Belcher is only 5 points more. For the champion options, he has the option to replace his bolter with a plasma pistol, a bolt pistol, or plasma gun, and here there have been no changes in the statistics for these weapons. So when we look at the ranged weapons and what to consider when selecting the weapon loadout, one thing that we have to keep in mind is how applicable are they, how many shots can we get, and so on. If we look at the Blight Launcher, we'll have a consistent high number of shots at the longest range. So it has a 24-inch range and it's an assault weapon and can be shot after advancing, and it's also a plague weapon. So it's good for example, Arch Contaminator and other traits. So we can see the Blight Launcher is one of the few weapons the Plague Marines can shoot even after advancing 2 shots. They can also shoot the Plague Belcher, and the Melta Gun are also assault weapons, but now we have to be closer to the enemy within 12 inches. The Bolter and the Plasma Gun at 24-inch range, they are rapid fire 1 weapon, so normally they would be doing only 1 shot, within 18-inch range. If we assume the abilities of the army, the Death Guard army, the inexorable advance and the malicious volleys, they should be able to shoot double shots at 18 inches. So from 18 inches range, the bolter can do it, and the plasma gun can shoot two shots each, and the bolter can additionally do it at 24 inches the full range if we stand still with the Plague Marines. But these weapons, unfortunately, are not plague weapons, and then they cannot today benefit from, for example, Arch Contaminator or rerolls, etc. The Meltagun is Assault 1 and can only do one shot within 12 inches. It's good versus multi-wound targets, and within 6 inches half range it can do additional damage d6 plus 2. And the Plague Spewer and the Belcher can be used within 12 inches. They are auto-hit d6 weapons, and the Belcher is an assault weapon while the Plague Spewer is a heavy weapon, so it cannot be used after advancing. So let's look at the ranged weapons and the expected average damage. And in this case, I'm considering the 12-inch range, so all the weapons can fire basically. And here I'm assuming that the target have multiple wounds, so the damage is not limited, for example, by rolling a d6 damage on a 1-wound target. And this is a graph that I've been using in my videos, where here you can see the damage done on average for a variety of targets, and here are a bunch of targets that have 4+ invul save, and these targets here have no invul saves here, and then they are grouped into different groups of having armor save. So here these targets here, the enemies, they have 2+ armor save, 3+ armor save, 4+ armor save, etc. And for each group we have the toughness of the enemy target going from toughness 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So basically in this chart you can find some target. For example, if we take an intercessor, they have a 3+ save, no invul save, and a toughness 5. So it would be this target here, and then you can see, for example, the Blight Launcher with 2 shots here should be able to do on average 1.4 wounds or damage to the intercessor. For example, the bolter would only be able to do 0.2 two wounds for the 2 shots it has, and etc. So you can find different types of targets in this chart, and we can see, comparing all the ranged weapons, that the lowest damage output is the bolter gun. Of course, strength 4, no AP, and only 1 damage. It does quite little damage across the board, but of course this damage can be improved with stratagems combos, but then we have to pay a lot of command points, for example, to increase the number of shots and to make the shots count like plague weapons, and etc. The Melta gun and the supercharged plasma gun, the light blue and the yellow, deal high damage. The problem with the plasma guns, of course, is that they can slay the user on ones, and now it's we cannot, even with a +1 to hit, we cannot avoid the 1, so it's a natural 1 to hit, then it would be able to slay the model. If we cannot supercharge the plasma gun, the yellow is the supercharged plasma gun and the gray is the plasma gun with no supercharging, we get rather underwhelming damage. So in this case it's quite lower. The damage is much better if we were able to consistently supercharge the plasma guns. And the Melta gun is doing a lot of good damage, but again for a multi-wound target, because it has only 1 shot with d6 damage in this scenario. The Blight Launcher is the orange one, and it does good damage across the board, and also it can be improved, being one of the few plague weapons here. It can be improved by Arch Contaminator, and then this would be higher if we had Arch Contaminator. Then the Plague Spewer and the Plague Belcher. The Plague Spewer is the green one. They do good damage versus targets with good invul saves and high invul saves, 4+, for example, because we can put out a lot of shots, and also they also do a lot of good damage, especially against targets with very little armor save. Again, because we can dish out a lot of shots, and the target cannot save so easily. So those are the best. Let's say the Plague Spewer is the best against a horde type enemy, but lower for not so good damage against good save targets. So this was the 12-inch range versus multi-wound targets. If we go to a 2-wound target, this is the expected average damage. So here the bolter, blight launcher, the plasma gun is unchanged, but the melta gun, the actual damage dealt is much reduced compared to previously, because now it cannot do the full d6 damage. It only would do a maximum of 2 damage after it wounds. So yeah, if the enemy has limited wounds, then of course the melta gun cannot do so much damage. So now we have the supercharged plasma gun, which is very unreliable, and then we have the blight launcher, and the spewers for some cases that are doing the best damage. If we look at if we are stepping, of course, a bit further away, and we have a 24-inch range, and here I'm assuming the unit has moved but not advanced, then we see clearly the blight launcher is the winner at longer ranges, always getting 2 shots compared to the plasma and bolter. And of course, if the unit advanced, and then like Plague Marines typically would do, at least for me, when in the first turn, let's say, typically I would advance them, and then I can only shoot with the blight launchers. If we advance, then we have the long range. Basically here we'd only see the blight launchers, and everything else cannot do any damage. So summarizing the ranged weapons, for me I think it's clear that the best all-round ranged weapon for the Plague Marines is the Blight Launcher, especially since it's a plague weapon and an assault weapon, meaning that you would use it quite a lot compared to some of the others, and has the best range, let's say. The supercharged plasma gun would also be good, but it's not easy to avoid models being slain. Of course, you can have rerolls of 1, but if you have a big squad shooting let's say 2-3 plasma guns and double shots, you might end up getting some 1s and slaying your own model, even with rerolls. I would consider a plasma gun for the champion for ranged purposes, if you want to have an extra focus for that, but I would not supercharge unless I have a reroll of 1 close by. The melta guns are good options versus multi-wound vehicle and monster targets, but you have to get in close, of course, 12-inch or 6 inches. The Plague Spear and the Belcher could become useful as a niche weapon versus horde-type enemies, and for Overwatch with a 12-inch, I think some opponent would think twice before charging your Plague Marines if they had the Plague Spewers. But I think all in all, I would prefer the Blight Launcher over the Plague Spewer. The bolter does not do very high damage on its own, but it can be useful anyway, of course. The bolter is the cheapest way to arm the Marines, and it's the cheapest way, basically, if you have Plague Marines, basically to hold objectives and put a lot of Plague Marine bodies on the tabletop. Now that the Plague Marines also will be getting 2 wounds, you are able to put a lot of wounds on the table, but that they will not be doing so much damage. In order to do a lot of damage with a bolter, of course, you can use some stratagems and psychic abilities, or etc. So some stratagems combos that are good for bolters is, for example, the Relentless Volleys. You would get a Rapid Fire 2 instead of Rapid Fire 1, so you will double the amount of shots, meaning that for each bolter you could be rolling 4 dice. If you add the Virulent Rounds stratagem, then the bolter becomes a plague weapon for the rerolls 1 to hit, and you get also rerolls for Arch Contaminator, and on a 6-2 wound the AP becomes -4 instead of 0, which can be really good against some targets. Veterans of the Long War, of course, +1 to wound. The bolter doesn't wound so easily tough targets because it only has a strength 4, and you can have the nearby Arch Contaminator. So if you take a normal case of 10 Plague Marines only armed with bolters, they would be shooting, let's say, 20 shots at an Intercessor squad. They would, on average, with no buffs, they would only be doing 2.2 wounds on average. But if you boost it with relentless volleys and rounds and the veterans of the long war, you would be dishing out 40 shots and you would be doing on average 8.6 wounds. So it's like 4 times the damage. But if you would take for the same points, you could get basically 9 Plague Marines, so you get 1 less Plague Marine, and then you have 2 Blight Launchers, and with no buffs, you would be doing 4.3 wounds on average compared to the only Bolter squad. So you like sacrificing 1 Plague Marine for the same cost, and you don't have to use CPs. You can do every turn without CPs. You can do more damage at least. And if you, for example, another stratagem combo that you can do with the cheapest Plague Marines, let's say, is the Blight Bombardment combo. If you have the Biolegos Purifier, Arch Contaminator, Veterans of the Long War, and Overwhelming Generosity, for example, then you don't need the very advanced weapons to do the damage. But I think in a five turn game, you cannot pull off these stratagems many times. So I prefer to have some weapons that can do decent damage, even if I cannot use stratagems on them. All right, moving on to the melee weapons. Here is the table here, and we have the updates that mostly we have seen a lot of changes for the stats for the melee weapons, and mostly it's good changes. And in combination with now the Plague Marines getting standard 2 attacks, it makes for some interesting choices and improved melee capability of our Plague Marines. So the Plague Knife gets an improvement, so the AP is -1, previously 0. And interesting maybe to start considering double knives, or because then we would have 3 attacks if the abilities stay as they are today, or 4 on the charge if we can keep Death to the False Emperor, or 5 if we use the stratagem Trench Fighters. But of course we have to see on the codex how many of these abilities are still there. The Bubotic Axe, which is an option for and can be used for all Marines, substituting the Bolter, now is +2 in strength. Previously is +1, and all Marines can get it with a knife. So it's now it's +2 strength, so basically strength 2, AP -2, and damage 1. The Flail of Corruption has also got an update. The strength has unfortunately decreased. Now the profile is +1. Previously it was +2. So now it's a strength 5 and previously strength 6. So of course it will be not as good as it was before, but still it can do loads of damage, assuming we still get all the abilities. For example, rolling D3 at hits per attack it has. Now when we have the 2 attack Marines, we should be able to do much more damage with the Flail of Corruption. And some other changing is the Plague Sword option for the champion is now +1 strength. Previously it was the user strength in AP -1, and probably I think this would be similar to the Bale Sword that the Blight Lord Terminators will be having. So for the Mace of Contagion, we don't have any changes of the statistics. Then the Great Plague Cleaver also stays the same, and the Power Fist stays the same, and the Power Fist and the Plague Sword are the options for the champion. The Flail of Corruption and the Great Plague Cleaver are the special melee weapons where we can only have 2 per squad. Bubotic Axe is an option for all of them, and the Mace of Contagion is an option that expensive option where you can take Axe and Mace of Contagion for maximum 2 Marines on top of this. The problem with the Mace of Contagion and the Great Plague Cleaver and the Power Fist is that they are -1 to hit, so with the Plague Marines only hitting on 4+. So yeah, with the Plague Marines, the melee configuration option and the attacks, with current point cost, the standard Marine with Bolter or Knife is 18 points and will have now 2 attacks. The Bolter of all Marines can be substituted for 1 more Knife. Currently this is 0 cost extra, so today it's 18 points, or a Bubotic Axe for +5 points. And if you take the Axe plus the Mace, you would be paying +5 and +5, so you'll be +10 points with the current with the current, let's say, point cost that of course will be updated with 2 wounds marines, I assume. In these cases, if you take the double melee weapons here and you lose the boulder for these combinations here, with the current rules, the vectors of disease, the plague marines would get 1 more attack, so then we would have a base of 3 per marine, but then we lose of course ranged shooting capability apart from grenades. Maximum, then the special weapons. Maximum 2 plague marines in the squad can replace the bolt or knife with either a Flail of Corruption for plus 15 points or the Great Plague Cleaver. The based attacks in these cases are still 2. Flail should then be 2d3 attacks and maybe even 3d3 attacks on the charge if we still keep the Hateful Assault, which I really hope. And the Great Plague Cleaver, as I said, is -1 to hit. So let's look at some of the damage comparison here. So if we compare the average expected damage against 2 wound targets, we see here the light blue is the Flail of Corruption, and it does the most damage here, assuming 2d3 attacks. On average, that would give us 4 attacks, so we can do quite a lot of wounds. So Flail of Corruption is the overall best damaging weapon. If also we have Death to the False Emperor, it's ridiculously strong. For every 6 you hit, then you would be able to do d3 more attacks. And you are not losing with the special ability this weapon has. You are not losing any wounds, even if you attack against the Horde. All the wounds need to be allocated. The Cleaver is the green here. It can also do some good damage, but it's better against the multi-wound target, but ineffective for cost versus low wound opponents, of course, with -1 to hit and less attacks, and d6 damage is not very good for low wound opponents. The Mace of Contagion, which is the yellow one, and the gray is the Bubotic Axe. It can do a bit more damage for multi-wound target, but not for low wound targets, and it's a bit too expensive for the small difference. So this is the situation for a 2 wound target like an intercessor. Here we can look at, if we look at the intercessors here, with a 3+ armor save, toughness 5, we should be able to be doing 2.5 wounds per Flail of Corruption in the attack phase. And here is the same table, but with multi-wound targets. Here we can see, of course, the Cleaver can then do the maximum damage, rolling its d6 damage. And here we can see the Mace of Contagion is a bit better than the Axe, but it was not better for a low wound target. And on the bottom we have the Plague Knives with 2 attacks, and if we have a dual knife we just get 3 attacks, so it's a bit better than the standard knife. Finally, let's look at the Plague Champion's melee weapon options. So we have the Plague Knife. He gets a base of 3 attacks. He can replace it with a Plague Sword. So the Plague Sword today is 0 points extra and looks just better for all targets than the Plague Knife. And then we see the Power Fist now is also doing a lot of extra damage here. Because now the champion is also having 3 attacks with the Power Fist, and probably it's worth considering. So the Power Fist, although -1 to hit, now that the champion can do 3 attacks base, could be an interesting option for currently 10 points. So summary for melee weapons, the Flail of Corruption is still a good weapon, a great weapon, although the strength now will be a bit lower. Assuming the point costs are unchanged and the d3 hits per attack, I would recommend taking 2 in the squad if you want to do a lot of damage in melee, or you believe that Yarrow Plague Marines will be charged by something. I think the Flails of Corruption are a very good way to do a lot of wounds. The Great Plague Cleaver is not worth it in my opinion, because it's just better to take the flails. It could be good against some monsters or some vehicles, but I think with Flail of Corruption you get a more it's more useful all-round weapon. The standard plague knives are not so bad. Now they have got an improved AP and can do significant damage, especially if we if we combine them with the blades of putrefaction. The 10 plague marines versus intercessors on the charge, assuming we will have 30 attacks. This would be 5.8 wounds on average. If we add the blades of putrefaction, we still have 30 attacks, but now we will be doing twice the damage, 11 wounds on average, including mortal wounds and plus one to hit due to the blades of putrefaction. If we add the trench fighter for 1 command point, we would be getting 1 more attack with knives, plus the blades of putrefaction. We will be up to 40 attacks. We will be doing 15 wounds on average on a squad of intercessors. So that's really good, even without the flails on top of this, for example. The double knives and bubotic axes can be considered for the non-special weapons marines in the squad if you want to have even more melee damage, but then you sacrifice the range, the shooting damage a lot, because then you basically cannot shoot at range. For the champion, consider upgrading to the plague sword, and the powerfish should be okay to add now that he has a 3 attacks base, but of course we have to think about the cost of the plus 10 points. Finally, some squad examples and comparisons. I tried to make an investigation here, selecting some squad of plague marines with equal amount of points and comparing the damage. So the maximum, let's say, specialized squad. Here I take 7 plague marines with 486 points, but you also can see here. So the champion in this case has the plague sword and the plasma gun, 2 blight launchers, 2 flails of corruptions, and 2 standard marine bolters for this first squad. That should be able to do a lot of both ranged damage with the blight launchers and the plasma gun, and a lot of damage in melee with the flails of corruption and the knives that the others are, and the sword here. Then we compare with the vanilla squad, where we have 10 marines for roughly the same points, 180 points. In these games, all are equipped with bolter and knives, and the champion can have the sword for 0 points. And then we have a melee specialized squad, 7 marines for 186 points. The champion in this case has a power fist and the bolter. We have 2 flails of corruption and 4 bubotic axes and knives. So here we are sacrificing a lot of the shooting and just focusing on melee. And then we have a ranged squad, 8 marines here for 174 points. The champion has the plasma gun. We have 2 blight launchers, and then we have 5 standard marine bolters. So let's look at how these squads are performing. So we can see here in the first graph is if we are shooting at 18-inch range, then we see the ranged squad that was more focused on range damage is a bit better than the maxed, the optimized, let's say, squad with both Flail of Corruptions and Blight Launchers, but still not much significantly higher damage. And here we see the melee specialized squad basically has very little range damage. It's basically, in this case, only the champion can fire with a bolter, and the vanilla squad is also quite considerably lower for a lot of the targets compared to the squads with special weapons and blight launchers. If we look at the squads in melee, and we assume we have not charged, so we don't have extra attacks, we see the melee squad is doing the best damage and quite a lot, significant damage here. You can see the scale is maximum 20 wounds here, and here the max is 12 wounds damage done. And the second, of course, is the max squad, where we have the 2 flails of corruption. And here we see the ranged squad is a bit lower than the vanilla squad. So basically we can see for equal points almost the squad that takes special melee weapons and special ranged weapons will always outperform the standard squad. So by taking the special melee weapons and taking the special blight launcher ranged weapons, you do better damage in both melee and shooting against the standard squad with just more marines. But of course, where the vanilla squad is better is that you have more bodies and you can take more wounds before they die. But in this case, with the vanilla squad, you probably are not dealing so much damage over the course of the game. So some summary now and final thoughts of this rather long video. The changes for the Plague Marine weapons, as we have seen, are for the ranged weapons. The Blight Launcher becomes a damage 2 weapon and previously damage D3. So this is a big improvement, or a good improvement. The Plague Spear and the Plague Belcher get the 12-inch range as expected. The Blight Launcher is still the most useful ranged weapon in my opinion, and should be the first choice for ranged weapons. The melee weapons, the Plague Knives get a welcome AP -1. Together now with the base attack going up to 2, I think this is really good. The Flail of Corruption has reduced strength, but still very good. Now it's only strength +1, so it's basically a strength 5 weapon now. The Biotic Axe becomes strength +2, so strength 6 weapon. The Plague Sword increases the strength and AP, and I think it's a good choice for the champion. Currently the Plague Sword is 0 points for the champion, so it's better just to say that the champion has a sword instead of the knife. The Power Fist also becomes a good choice for the champion, because now he has a base attacks of 3 and he could make some decent damage, even if it's -1 to hit. Overall, I think the Flail of Corruption is still the best specialized damage melee weapon. The squad configurations, and these of course are early thoughts. Of course we need to get all the points and see all the abilities before selecting, but so far I think one of the best rounded squad composition are to take 2 Blight Launchers and 2 Flails of Corruption. The champion with a plasma gun and a sword or a fist, for example, would be a good configuration in both ranged damage and the melee damage. For holding objectives and stratagem combos and just to fill out troop squads, of course the cheapest possible way offering the highest durability are the Bolter and Plague Knife standard Marines, but they are doing rather underwhelming damage, especially in shooting, if you are not using a lot of command points to buff them. A melee focus squad could be 2 Flails of Corruption and either double knives or knife and biotic axes. The champion in this case with Power Fist, but this squad, although be able to do a lot in melee damage, will be very limited output in shooting, and maybe it's very difficult to deliver them close to the enemy to do melee damage. And a ranged damage focus squad could be 2 Blight Launchers, the plasma gun for the champion, and bolters for the rest of the guys. Still, this squad is still decent in melee with Plague Knives, but of course not as good as adding the flails. But you can get a little bit more shooting damage by adding a bit more guys with the bolters here. Some niche ideas for arming. If we could use the Terax drill, it could be interesting to take Plague Spears to shoot opponents after disembarking, maybe, and making a Meltagun anti-vehicle squad, but I think it's quite difficult for the Plague Marines to come very close to vehicles. It's probably better to shoot with the Blight Launchers and leave the anti-vehicle work to, for example, our Demon Engines. So this concludes the rather lengthy analysis of all the weapon abilities and the damage for different weapons for the Plague Marines. What are your thoughts about the new rules, and what are your favorite squad compositions, and what are your preferred weapon choices? If you like, please leave a comment, and if you like the video, please press like, and please subscribe to the channel, where I will be posting more videos and analysis of weapons and death card units going forward. So with these words, GeneralJannis is signing out. Stay safe out there, and bye bye.